Hello, and welcome to Season 12 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. Each week we watch the same movie on our own and then hop on a call to discuss it. This season, the theme is blatant pandering. We're going to review 10 movies that were either made in or set in the U.S. states that have downloaded the most episodes of The Horrific over the last few years. This will be a shorter season, so we may work in some listener recommendations and horror news along the way too. Thanks for listening. So as we continue down our list of movies that were either set in or filmed in or about, which I guess is the same as set in, the states that download our episodes the most, this week we're taking a little trip down to Arkansas.
Yeah, Arkansas.
Place near and dear to my heart because it's where my wife's from. And probably the most accurate thing I can say about Arkansas is it's a great place to be from, not a great place to be in.
Couldn't agree more.
I'm going to get
adding to the list of we're technically trying to
we're trying to pander to the field. Yeah, exactly. And now we're
terrible at this.
I know. Sorry to any Arkansas listeners. Northwest Arkansas is beautiful. Anyway,
well, it's not. I'm just kidding.
Before we get in any more trouble, the movie we're doing here is the original The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And so we have another late 70s horror movie. And I know that this movie takes place in Texarkana, which is a city that is on both the Texas side and the Arkansas side of the border. But a lot of it was filmed in another town in Arkansas. So this is one that I was kind of interested in doing the movie anyway.
Yeah.
But then also I think it does check the box of being an Arkansas movie just because of where a lot of the filming happened. So don't at me, brah.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, anyone who's been listening to the podcast for a while now, we've definitely talked about wanting to do this one. It's supposed to be an inspiration for a lot of films, horror films. And so we wanted to add it anyway, and it just kind of fit. It worked out.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is one that is, like you said, known to be pretty influential, but also has some pretty, famously not great scenes.
Yeah.
that are, a little over the top.
Yeah.
So that makes for a really fun movie watching experience, which I feel like this was.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I will introduce it, and then you can do your fun facts. And then we will get into the trombone stabbing details.
Love it.
In 1976, American International Pictures brought us The Town That Dreaded Sundown, a slasher thriller set in Texarkana, Arkansas/Texas. The movie tells the story of a serial killer in post-World War II small-town Arkansas who terrorizes young couples while wearing a white hood over his face. The story is loosely based on the Texarkana Moonlight Murders from 1946 and adds elements of horror, 1970s police procedurals, and humor to the story. The Town That Dreaded Sundown was made on a budget of $400,000 and brought in about $5 million at the box office. It can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
Perfect.
Second time's a charm. What did you learn about this movie?
I'm so glad that you said loosely based on. Initially, I was kind of trying to wonder, when, as a society, did we accept, okay, anytime a horror movie says it's based on true facts, it's maybe. Because, we're so used to this now, because, when trying to read up on this, it would be, controversy with this film, and the controversy is, it was just loosely based on it, and it's well, yeah, it's... we know that. That's how it is now. You know, think about, with the movie Strangers. But anyway, so it's loosely based on, like you were saying, the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Took place February 22nd through May 3rd, 1946. So in the actual Moonlight Murders that, this is kind of taking place on, one of the things it was talking about is they actually had a guy. So they never caught anyone officially for this crime. They had thoughts that it was, I think it was like a thief, car thief maybe. I'm trying to find his name real quick. It was like Yule Swinney was his name. He was a car thief, and that's who they thought it was. And his wife, so Yule Swinney, the suspect in this case, his wife came out, gave the police information that only the police and the killer would know. And they couldn't use that because of circumstantial evidence. And he had recently stole a car, and so they basically, like, because it was like a third strike or something like that, they ended up giving him like 25 years for that case. He appealed it and was released from prison at 57. He was then arrested again in 1975 for counterfeiting coins and stealing another car, and sentenced to prison. Ran away, sentenced to another, added more time to his life, but he died in 1994. It's kind of weird because, like, part of you thinks, like, well, if it was him, he was still a criminal, but, like, he stopped his killing urges, which just doesn't seem like, with all we know, right, with serial killers and all that, like, doesn't seem normal for them to just all of a sudden stop and just, like, put it in the past, because, like, it's something in their brain that's kind of driving them. But also, like, he may have just gone to another place and took care of those urges, if that was who it actually was.
So I had read in a couple of different places about there being a popular theory that the killer had been arrested for other charges.
Yeah.
So, like, they never caught him, but the killings seemed to have stopped.
Yeah.
And so there was this theory, and I did not know the other details around that, about that being, like, the specific guy. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And so anyway, so that's who they had thought. Who knows if that's the case or not. But anyway, moving forward, this film also has an Oklahomie in it. I was so excited to see him. It has Ben Johnson in it. Ben Johnson is from Pawhuska, Oklahoma. He was in a lot of, like, westerns. I think he was in a few with, like, John Wayne. His sister is actually, just fun fact, is really good friends with my mom. So yeah, it was just exciting to see him and see someone, local, acting. So Ben Johnson was, like, the I guess, detective or whoever they brought in that, like, took control from the get-go.
In my notes, he was the badass.
Yes. Yeah. That's him. That's Ben Johnson. So, so, like, if you ever go to Pawhuska, Oklahoma, they actually have, like, Ben Johnson museum there. And I've been there. It's actually kind of cool because they have a sheriff's rifle in there from, like, I think it was, like, the 20s or 30s. And if you look at the stock of the lever action rifle, there's notches, meaning that was, they would notch people who they had killed, and I think there was, like, 8 or so or something like that. There was multiple notches in that, which was just crazy to see. But anyway, I get off topic. So, like I was saying, this is definitely inspired horror films. A lot of people say this is the inspiration for Friday the 13th Part 2's Jason's mask that he wears in there, because it's the same style. Yeah. You could see resemblance to from this to Halloween movies that were made after. I mean, just a whole bunch. And so I think it's just interesting because, like, I feel like when I really started getting into horror movies, like, right out after high school was when I really started, because of my buddy Johnny, and this was always one that they said, like, you need to watch this one. But at the time, we're so old, streaming was, like, something, I don't even know if it was really heard of at that point. Basically, you had, like, you could pirate stuff, but it just wasn't as common, and so it wasn't as easy to find, because we would go to, like, Hastings or whatever used DVD store to try to find them. So anyway, this is what I've heard about for years and years. Ended up watching it a few years ago for the first time, and I don't know why I said that on my facts, but those are my facts.
Cool. I thought this was interesting. But that what you were talking about got me a little derailed too, just because the idea of, I feel like there were a lot of movies that kind of fell into that category where like it wasn't popular enough to be widely circulated on DVD.
Yeah.
Like when you had to like print the media to get it out. But I feel like now that in the streaming age, that actually makes a lot of things more accessible because it doesn't really cost all that much to digitize a thing that's already made.
Right.
And so then you can just put it up and if you can keep making money off of it, you're good to go. Feel free to cut all that out. I don't really care.
Daniel, saying that to yourself? That's good. You should have seen my face when you said that. I was like, uh-oh. No, I was kidding.
So this movie was really interesting to me just because of the way they did the storytelling. Because the intro had like a narrator, but the camera quality was way too good to be like a post-World War II documentary. And so it was, parts of it like had a narrator and were almost meant to be like a documentary style thing. Mm-hmm. But then also it didn't really look like the 40. Like I would bet that Texarkana looks pretty similar to how it did in this movie today. So yeah, like I get the small town kind of stays the same over time. Yeah. But also that's not in my mind like how I picture the 40s.
Right.
So I had a really hard time like trying to remember like, oh yeah, this is supposed to be in, a long time ago. They're trying to do like this more like documentary thing like after the fact about it. But it just like I think that it was an effective way to cover a lot of ground fast as far as like setting up the story and introducing characters so that they could just get into the action. And I do like that, but it was just kind of the execution of it took me a little bit to get used to, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly fair to say because in a way it was kind of like that with me, even though I watched it before. But I feel like after almost like the first segment, it really kind of set in what this was about, what was happening. And that's when I actually think I embraced it a little bit more because like at one time it seemed like it was almost like, a different section of the story. And so like almost like my watching like reset, cause it was like this whole new thing happening. And, cause you had the voiceover happening like it was a documentary and a couple of the scenes for sure looked and reminded me, in the documentary style. But then kind of like what you were saying when we recorded Snow Beast like so long ago, this also had the same effect on me where like one camera looked and sounded so good. But like, there was one scene where Ben Johnson's talking in an office and like, it just looks like he's a professional actor. Like he knows he's been there and like, so it's just really good. And literally same scene, like he's still talking. It cuts to another camera and the audio drops so bad and the video quality drops so bad. And it's like who edited this? Like you should have just left it for like 3 words, but, it seemed like it just depended on which angle or which camera they used of the quality, which is strange because Snow Beast came out around the same time and same problems, but who knows?
Yeah, it was interesting. This one had that, kind of the setup of like the incredible story you're about to see is true. Only the names have been changed, which is always funny, especially, about all the things that you talked about that were different from the real one. Yeah. But it's interesting that it was presented sort of before like the faux documentary movie. Right. And I feel like one thing that might be influential from that as well is, what is the logical conclusion of that? And that's maybe something more like Blair Witch, where you're kind of trying to set it up so that the audience thinks that it's real and you're presenting it not just as a standard horror movie, but almost like a different type of format of film that lends to the credibility of it, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah, for sure. Here's a strange fact though. When we watched The City of the Dead that took place on March 3rd, this one also took place on initially started on March 3rd. Oh yeah. My brother's birthday. Another one on his birthday.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
He's lucky to be alive.
Yeah, he is. He's survived witches and this damn serial killer. Damn.
Yeah. One thing, so I mentioned before, one thing that I felt like worked well was that they could use the narrator to cover all the boring parts and then just get into the action. And I feel like that worked really well, especially in the beginning where they're kind of setting it all up. And then you have the guy and the girl in the car and he's like trying to get busy and she's not having it. And that's when like the predator, the killer, first shows up and he's sneaking around the car and then pulls the belts out of the engine, breaks open the window, drags the guy out, comes back for the girl, drags her off. And then the opening credits are like the girl's bloody body on the side of the road. And I mean, they just got straight to it, didn't they?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's like,
there's no warm up on that one.
Right. Which I think was like, it worked, in my opinion. It's like, okay, we're setting the tone, cause it's also setting the tone for the problem that people are discovering in their city.
Yeah.
The thing so there are accuracies to the actual story, and then there's definitely not. But one of the things, like a couple of the differences, or at least one, was like when they found a couple in the film, like they were beat to death, but in real life they were shot to death. And I was kind of thinking about it and wondering, like, don't get me wrong, like, the fear of being shot and killed is super scary, but like the thought of being like pulled out of your car and beat to death, I feel like it's almost more terrorizing, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, well, technically it's not accurate to the actual story. However, like it adds to the intensity. Like they're like, well, we're going to make this a horror movie because it's a horror story, like a real life horror story. But like this adds to the intensity of it. Like otherwise we would have another one about like, what was the movie that was kind of based on Son of Sam in New York? I don't remember what it was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Was it Maniac?
Yes, I think it was Maniac. Yeah. So it definitely kind of, that was the same thing with Maniac where like, which was intense in parts, but like, I didn't feel like it was necessarily as scary because it's like they would show up and get shot, whatever the case, but yeah, added to the intensity being beaten to death.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That Patrolman Benson sure was a character.
It's so difficult because you're like, if you just keep some of these. yes. I don't know.
Yeah.
You're just like, man, like I get the idea or concept of what you're trying to accomplish with it, but man, alive.
Yeah. There were some smaller, like cultural details worked into this one that I felt like made it a lot more believable. Like after the second attack happened, they talked about like how all the gun stores sold out.
Yeah.
And, people are buying, more locks or whatever for the houses and stuff. And it's just like, yeah, that all 100% makes sense, but that's not really a thing that you find out about in a horror movie because typically you're focused on like a couple of characters and the situation that they're in. So one of the things where I feel like the narration was a benefit to this movie was when they could add in some of those like bigger things about like how the town reacted or sort of like the larger cultural social things, because that really like helps set the environment in a way that's kind of different. If it's like the whole town is terrified, which would mean that, obviously the police are getting more desperate. Obviously they're going to have to pull in some help from outside. There's a lot more visibility. There's a lot more press, and all of that kind of goes into the investigation and like the urgency around it, which is kind of an interesting take because a lot of times you don't have any of that in a horror movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely interesting because like I love the voiceover and the documentary style, but I think that where they save time by doing like what you were saying, like they were able to kind of cut out some of the smaller pieces, I feel like, or things that you wouldn't normally think of or might be hard to show like in a scene. But then at the same time, any time the killer was around, they had like 30 minutes of screaming taking place, and so it's like you could have cut out like literally half the time of screaming, got the same effect. And you could have had a scene where like people were just running into a gun store and running out with boxes, or whatever. But yeah, it was just,
Also, I called the guy the Predator earlier. He was the Phantom.
The Phantom.
I had my P words mixed up. I'm sorry. Okay. Don't fire me. So one thing too, that I thought you had mentioned, that one thing they added for the movie that made it maybe a little bit more intense or a little more like psychologically affecting was the beating instead of the shooting. I think another thing that was really crazy was just the idea of the female victims having like the massive bite wounds on their backs. Mm-hmm. Like that is just a brutality that is very like physical and in your space. And like, even just thinking about that, it's like you can almost like feel on your own back like how terrible that would be.
Yeah.
And so that I thought was a really interesting thing to add into it that just was for pure terror, right? It's almost like a biological terror, the way that they set up this guy's mode of attack. It's just the brutality of it, how strong he seemed to be, how premeditated it all was, or not premeditated it was. Like it was just like he's just out looking for victims. It's not like he's stalking anybody.
Right.
And just the randomness of it and the brutality of it, I think works for a really effective psychological take that goes along with like the gore of kind of the more standard slasher type horror.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think where they did some of the good too, they tried to make it seem like this guy is a psychopath by doing strange things, like the knife on the trombone, for example. Such a weird, such a weird, such a weird thing. But at the same time, it's like, well, that was a swing and a miss. But they did do these pieces that were really good. Like the biting on the back. Like to me, that's psychopath. That's insane.
Yes. Right.
Trombone with a knife is not plausible. I mean, just doesn't make sense, to me. It doesn't.
No.
So, that's where I just felt like it was kind of a swing and a miss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the next part of my notes, I basically had two scenes that I feel like demonstrated the extremes of this movie. One of those was the trombone scene, because it's this crazy setup that's really intense. Like the killer is wrenching a guy out of a moving car. The girl who is in the car tries to steer it, but then wrecks. And then you see the Phantom just beat the guy down. And then he gets the girl and ties her to a tree, goes over and shoots the boyfriend. Then out of thin air, he pulls a trombone.
Well, she was a trombone player.
Oh, so he got it out of the car, I guess, presumably, but you didn't see that happen.
Because in real life, it was a saxophone. He didn't attach a knife to a saxophone, but that's what she played.
Gotcha. But then he pulls this trombone out, and he tapes a knife to the arm of it, and then he uses it to stab the girl in the back repeatedly. And in my notes, I just wrote, "What in the actual hell?"
Yes.
Yeah. It is the most puzzling thing. And I have no explanation whatsoever. And that was so over the top and ridiculous and goofy and just wild. Like, I have no explanation or no words for it. It was distractingly dumb. It completely takes you out of the moment. It makes the whole thing seem like a farce. And you're like, why did it take this massive left turn when that didn't have to happen? On the far opposite side of that, though, there's a scene where the cops are all at a restaurant talking about the killings. And then you see someone else in the restaurant stand up, but it focuses only on like the bottoms of his pants and his shoes. And they don't come right out and say it, but it's the killer. And the cops are talking about how they could be passing him on the street every day and not even know it. And that just 100% drives home like that element of the terror, that it's an unknown thing, but it keeps happening in the town, which means the guy lives nearby. and could be just walking among them at any point. And that was such like a creative and sort of understated way of really driving home that point. And like, I love that they didn't show his face. Like they kept that, the mystery of that, but also by using that consistent shot of his pants and shoes, you knew what they were doing or what they were implying with it. And so that was like very subtle, very good movie making. And so it's like, this movie had everything from that to, what if I killed a woman by playing a knife trombone? Like,
yeah,
it's unfathomable to me how both of those scenes could exist in the same movie.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the prime example. And, you know, the only thing I could think of, like, the only reason why I could think that they would say, yeah, let's add this scene with the trombone in it, is for the fact that, you know, in the 70s, with, you know, obviously not having internet, not too many people knew about the actual true story, maybe. And so they thought, if we say it's based on true stories, they'll see this and think it's even more scary because that killer's still out there and they're crazy enough to have the trombone or something. I don't know. I don't know. But that's the only thing I can think of, because like, I feel like any logical person, maybe the editor would be like, oh, hey, not so great here.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
I do think that, you know, I do think that they were definitely trying, but it's almost like it was wrote, like they had wrote or filmed the movie in two different, like 2 different years or something. Like the first part of one year and the, you know, like where they forgot some of the stuff and maybe had to come back and re-record, because it's like, there are chunks of this that are just like so good, so amazing.
Yeah.
But then there are other chunks that you're just like, you know, what? Like, I mean, even adding the humor, I guess what was supposed to be humor of like the cops, you know, dressing up as females, so that they can try to lure them out, you know, like that, which actually happened, you know, but, you know, even, you know, like grabbing the balloon or whatever was in the guy's, bra or whatever, you know, it's just like, there were a couple pieces where you're like, oh, that's not necessarily needed. Like, didn't work, but, yeah, what can you do?
Yeah, it definitely felt like there was the serious movie, and then there were the scenes that got added to try and lighten the mood. Yeah. And those scenes to lighten the mood just really stuck out as awkward for the most part.
Right.
To me.
Yeah.
But I did like that we had a movie MVP, and that was the dog that saved Helen.
That's true.
It's been a while since we could award that.
It's been a while since. We haven't really seen too many dogs dying in films lately.
Yeah, it was nice that, you know, this one, the dog was a hero, not a victim. So
we had like a big chunk of time early on in the podcast where like everyone we watched.
I know.
Yeah, that was so strange.
Yeah. But yeah, this was an interesting one. I mean, did you have feelings on the ending?
I do want to mention something before we get to the ending, though. I totally forgot one of the biggest inspirations that this movie had done to other horror movies, I feel like, is one of the characters' name was Peggy Loomis.
Oh.
Yeah.
Dr. Loomis.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Just saying. Which came out a year later. But anyway, no, are we gonna, where do you want to start? Like from the train scene or?
Well, I want to come back to the train scene last.
Okay.
For unrelated reasons. Yeah. But just kind of in general, the way the movie wrapped up. Because this one, I feel like a lot of times we talk about like Hollywood horror, or a movie having a Hollywood ending versus a horror ending. And I felt like this one went full on horror ending, which I like a lot.
Yeah. I feel like it went on full horror ending for early horror films, in the sense that the killer's still out there, he's still going, but even though that's the case, like now when we watch it again and it's supposed to be based on true stories, I think, well, it's been so long, like this guy's obviously dead.
Oh, sure.
For one, but for two, it's like it still had this like feeling at the end where like And I think it was based off of what Ben Johnson said of like, or he could have been arrested for something else to make you think like, okay, there is still safety out there. Like one of the reasons why I like when the bad guy lives at the end is because like, okay, the fear is still there because that's still going to happen again. Like I have a hard time believing that they can just stop, randomly. Yeah. And so like, I still had this feeling of like, oh, but it's over with. Could have been the years between when it was filmed and not, but yeah, that's probably my biggest take on it. I just felt like it accomplished what it needed. I like that it was still that the killer, is still out there probably, and you never know if it's going to happen again. The scariest part though is what I don't think they anticipated, and that's the inspiration of that people get. I think sometimes for. In real life, I guess I should say.
Yeah, I thought in general it was really, from a pure movie making perspective, the way that it was so set up for them to catch him at the end, and then they're just like, nah, he got away, probably still out there. It's right. Like, oh damn,
yeah,
because so much of it, it felt like what would have been the standard progression in a movie would be that there would be some kind of resolution. So the fact that there wasn't, and really it's just up to you to be like, oh man, like next time I'm on a country road, is this guy out there? I just, an effective way to keep that feeling that the whole movie was trying to create still in the audience after they leave.
Yeah. And another thing I totally forgot to mention was Texarkana actually sued the films because, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's kind of happening now again. But so they sued and basically saying like, hey, it's turning the fear back up. Like this is, this was very real to us kind of thing. And it made me think about Netflix putting out the Dahmer series because a lot of people are coming out and saying, hey, like, victims are still having to deal with this, right. And so it's so strange to think about that. On one side, you get like, hey, but this put out a really good horror film, or this produced a good horror film, inspired a ton of others. But like when this did come out, like people were like probably pretty messed up from it. And I think they sued the ad campaign because the ads would play on whatever radio or whatever, but like I don't think you could sue the film itself because you can't no one's going to force you to watch it,
Right.
So.
Yeah, it was, it's kind of interesting, the relationship between, I guess, the subject of the film and the film itself. But the only other thing I had on my list was the train scene. So this is kind of like the setup for the final confrontation, I guess, between the guy and the Phantom and the cops, and they're like chasing him, and they're like running on opposite sides of a train, and they're trying to like shoot him like underneath it. And they did some really, really cool things from a filming perspective. Mm-hmm. And, they kind of did like some slow motion and like really kind of artistic shots that weren't used in other parts of the movie.
Yeah.
And at the time I was thinking, man, how did they get all these like crazy good shots in this one scene? Mm-hmm. And get your phone out because I'm about to send you something. Mm-hmm. I solved the mystery. They just happened to be chasing him next to a train that was carrying cameramen.
Oh, did you get it? Oh, great. Oh, that's it. That's great.
I had to rewind that one and be like, did I really just see what I thought I saw?
Yeah.
There's just a shirtless camera dude sitting right there on that train in full view of that scene where the two guys in cowboy hats are shooting underneath the train.
That's funny. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great. So if you guys rewatch the scene, just go in like slow-mo or something, and you could definitely, it's like towards the end of the train, it looks like, so.
Yeah. But anyway, it made more sense if the train just happened to be full of Hollywood caliber cameramen, then no wonder they got so many great shots.
Yeah. Like this train was heading to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Get out your cameras.
Yeah.
You know what's funny is they didn't have an ending, so basically they had to they had a character who played Norman Ramsey write that last scene, and
interesting. Just to give it some kind of like climax.
Mm-hmm. And according to legend, old Ben Johnson and Norman Ramsey, who Andrew Prine, who played Norman Ramsey, were super hungover when filming that.
That's funny. So anyway, yeah, this movie definitely had highs and lows. The highs were pretty high, the lows were pretty low. But it is a unique movie. I will say this one was very interesting to me, just in that I feel like it's not one I've seen 100 times before. And even though the story is pretty, firmly your standard kind of slasher, there were, I think, a lot of very effective psychological elements to it as well. Yeah,
without a doubt. I mean, definitely on the Halloween movie rotation, October movie rotation, I enjoyed it. I mean, I really liked it, so... What can you do?
Stay the hell out of Arkansas is what you can do.
That's for damn sure.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.